ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
This Ravens preview. Andy Pollin here as we get ready for the Ravens home opener this weekend as they open up against the Raiders after losing at Kansas City last week. We are awaiting Kevin Oestreicher, who is with Locked On Ravens, which is a podcast which looks at the team. And one of the things that I want to talk to him about, this is somewhat controversial with them, and it's stretched into the league. If you were watching last Thursday when they lost to Kansas City, linebacker Kyle Van Noy left the game with a fractured orbital bone. And he expressed some unhappiness after the game as to how quickly he got treatment. He said that he was taken down to the locker room, but should have received more appropriate care and so forth and so on. And now the Players Association has gotten involved in this. Executive Director Lloyd Howell expressed disappointment in the responsiveness of the Chiefs' medical staff and said that they had provided help as quickly as possible. Van Noy feels differently. And yesterday, John Harbaugh addressed that when he talked, or the other day he addressed it when he talked to the media and actually, worked around it. Didn't really want to deal with it. So as we bring in Kevin Oestreicher and get ready to preview what's coming up on Sunday, let me start with that. What's your sense of what's going on with the Ravens, the league, and Kyle Van Noy and the way that his injury was handled last week?
Yeah, I think both sides are playing it the way that I would expect them to. Obviously, kind of sticking up for them, and because if there was any wrongdoing here, it could really spell trouble for especially the league side of things. Where for Van Noy, I mean, obviously he felt like his care wasn't adequate, and the NFL, feels like it's kind of standard procedure and everything with that. So he was on the ground for a while. I mean, he was kind of laying on his stomach after he suffered his eye injury. But I think that we might not have seen the last of what's going on with Kyle Van Noy because he was pretty adamant on his show talking about and describing what happened, that there might be a little more to the story than initially anticipated.
Yeah, now, I guess on the road it must be different than it is at home. So if he had suffered this injury at M&T, that he'd be handled by Ravens doctors, or what was the protocol and how this injury was treated?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the away versus home protocol, but obviously you don't necessarily have all of your team doctors there, where you obviously have a traveling group of doctors that go with the away team. But obviously, depending on the severity of the injury, the home doctors will come out, will help you. So with Van Noy, it wasn't like they brought out a card or anything or had all that protocol going in. But I do know that, it is a little different because you're not necessarily surrounded by your team doctors at the stadium. There's a party of doctors that go to the game away, but it's not like you are at home, so you have all of those resources available to you.
I know players play through crazy injuries. He hasn't practiced this week. Is there a chance he's going to play on Sunday?
I wouldn't count on it personally. I mean, I guess you can believe in miracles, but I feel like that's an injury where it's going to probably need a couple of weeks. I wouldn't anticipate him playing, maybe even for the last, maybe up until week 5. I mean, I think he's going to miss a couple weeks with that one, which is a tough blow because, they already kind of a little thin at that position with experience. So I don't know if they're going to want to bring anybody in, but it's now Odafe time. It's David Ajabo's time, and, you might have to kind of look to the free agent market, or maybe if things continued this way and another guy goes down, the trade market could be a possibility later on as that gets closer, because Eric DeCosta, he is not shy about going and adding at positions of need.
Yeah, and that's exactly how Van Noy got there. Now, you say 4 weeks. They have not made a decision yet, I guess, about injured reserve, right?
No, there's nothing there yet. So it might be they feel comfortable enough to where a timeline is within that 4-week window, or maybe right up against it, so that they feel like they have the flexibility to, I guess, hope that 3 weeks would come by and he'd be okay, so you don't have to have him miss that extra week. So I think it maybe falls right in that timeline. I mean, I will put a disclaimer: I'm not a doctor or anything of the sort. So,
right.
All this stuff is, just stuff based off of a couple of different factors. But, yeah, for Van Noy, you can hope he plays on Sunday, but personally, I'm not holding my breath.
Okay, and that brings us to this as they move on without him, what looks like a tough stretch. And we're talking to Kevin Oestreicher, who does Locked On Ravens, a podcast. The schedule, they got Vegas at home this week. Then they go to Dallas. They're home against Buffalo. We saw what Buffalo did last night. That's a Sunday night game. And at Cincinnati before they get, I guess, a little bit of a breather in playing Washington. They competed against Kansas City. Going on the road and trying to beat the defending champs is tough. But the outlook for the team and the health of them, minus Van Noy, how do things look as they head into what looks like a really tough stretch here?
I still think it's good. I think that every team, and this is especially true for the Ravens this year at least, is, week one, these first couple games, first month of the year, you're just trying to knock off some of the rust, and especially for a Ravens team that every team now we know does the preseason differently. For example, the Chiefs, they played their starters in the preseason. The Ravens did not. So you're kind of looking at these stretches of guys getting acclimated with each other and figuring things out. You want to go, with one position group that kind of embodies that. I think it is the offensive line, where you saw Tyler Linderbaum miss almost all of training camp. You saw a bunch of other guys get moved around at certain positions and trying to figure things out. And that can be tough, especially when you kind of get put into this big situation in week one, back-to-back champs, and you got Chris Jones on the other side of you. So I think for the team overall, the outlook, it's still good. You do need to win a lot of these games, though, because September losses, they don't necessarily matter in September where, if you start 1-1 or 1-2 or something of the sort, your season's not over. Obviously, you have plenty of time to bounce back from that. But September losses do matter in December. And when we start talking about seeding and playoffs and which team beat which team, who has the head-to-head record, who has the better conference record, you look back on games in September and you're like, oh, man, well, if they could have had that one, things could be different. So I'm okay with where they are right now. Obviously, I like to give it a little time before I start making full evaluations. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was a loss to Kansas City that it's tough and disappointing to lose. Obviously, Baltimore felt that way about it. But they showed a lot of positives, especially staying in that game and fighting their way back and almost tying or even winning that game.
We've had a lot of chatter here this week about Jaden Daniels running 16 times. Lamar Jackson ran 16 times last week. He's a veteran. You'd think veterans are moving more in the direction of running sparingly. What do we see? Patrick Mahomes ran 3 times in that game. Is that a concern that he ran as many times as he did, or do they say, hey, this guy's been around, he knows what he's doing?
Yeah, I think to me, I'm not necessarily putting Lamar out there personally and having him run that much, and that's any quarterback. It's not just Lamar, where, Lamar was asked about it, and he said, obviously he's going to do whatever it takes to win, but he said he's not really trying to find out if 16 carries a week is sustainable. That put him right up around the high 200s in terms of carries for the season. Obviously, all the Ravens runs that he had were not all designed runs. So the Ravens necessarily didn't go out there with the plan of, all right, we're going to run Lamar 16 times. Here are the plays we're calling. Lamar, you're taking this. Some of his runs come on scrambles, on broken plays, on things that he sees. And that's something that we're going to see throughout the season. And I think it's a big part of his game is just kind of taking what's there and making sure that, he doesn't have to force anything down the field into a guy that's covered, or if coverage is good on a play, he can take off. He can do that. And that's one of the best aspects of his game. But I think that, you talk about the other comments that John Harbaugh had about, Derrick Henry and, they didn't bring him in to run the ball 30 times, which I do agree with. You don't want to run Derrick Henry 30 times. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if it's something where you have him in a platoon with Justice Hill, I wouldn't have brought him in if you're going to have him in a platoon with Justice Hill. I feel like, the Ravens haven't had one of those big, only one running back runs the ball in the offense the majority. It's really been a committee in the Lamar Jackson era. But I think you brought in Derrick Henry to take some of the workload off of Lamar Jackson. So Lamar Jackson doesn't have to put on that Superman cape every time that he steps out on that field. I think that's what you brought Derrick Henry in there for. So I think you just have to utilize him that way. He's a talented player. And while you're not trying to run him into the ground and have him have 30 carries a game. I think if you can establish that balance between the two and keep defenses on their toes, it'll benefit everybody.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Henry, and maybe you really addressed that a little bit earlier when you talked about how little they use the starters in the preseason. This could be something that's a work in progress, right? The two of them and relying more on Henry to handle the load, that could develop over the next few weeks.
I certainly think so. And to your point as well, with the chemistry factor, it is so real. I think that some people, might not think it is because, these guys are professionals and they go out there and they do their job. But at the same time, it does take a certain amount of just in-game reps. We can talk about joint practices. We can talk about even if they did play in the preseason. But regular season game action, it's just different. So Derrick Henry comes over after 8 years in Tennessee, and it's like, well, it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. And this is an offense where they're predicated on running the ball. Derrick Henry should have plenty of opportunities throughout the season. I don't expect them to get away from that in any way, shape, or form. Kind of like what they did in Week 1, where I thought they ran the ball 5 times in that first drive really well with Derrick Henry. They were getting him to his spots. Chiefs were on their toes with him, and Lamar Jackson was able to run it himself and work play action off of that really effectively. But it will take time for them chemistry-wise. It was never going to be a perfect thing one game into the season. I never expected that, and I don't think a bunch of people did. But once we start getting more further into the season, we are going to start to see, I think, this running game pick up because that is still their bread and butter, and I think they're going to use it a lot this season. Okay.
It's been 3 years since they played. It's quite a while, and the Raiders beat them the last time around at Vegas. This time, both teams, I think they're in different places. I would expect the Ravens to win this game. What's your outlook for Sunday?
I would too, and part of that is what I just talked about with establishing that run game. We saw the Raiders in Week 1 get run on by a couple of old Ravens faces, J.K. Dobbins being the main one, 10 carries, 135 yards, and a touchdown. He had a huge 61-yard run, another big one in there too. So, again, for the offensive line being able to establish their dominance up front early, open up those rushing lanes for Derrick Henry, and that will, again, force the Raiders to start stacking the box a little bit, putting in personnel to match that. And then much like we saw in Kansas City on that first drive, well, if you start cheating up on that run game, you can work play action with your heavy personnel because Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, they're not the typical guy that you cover as a linebacker, a typical guy that you cover as a safety. They present a bunch of matchup problems, and if those guys are running loose or running in the middle of the field and you're using a lot of your defensive power to try to load up against the run, well, you leave Isaiah Likely or Mark Andrews one-on-one, and it might be a long day for you. So I think that, to me, is the key. I would expect the Ravens to win as well. I don't necessarily expect a 30-point blowout, although there is a scenario where that happens. I more think it's a double-digit win, and they win it in a way that you feel good about them heading into Week 3.
Very good. Hey, thanks for the time, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much for having me.
Kevin Oestreicher. Locked on Ravens is the podcast. Coming up, comments from John Harbaugh, Roquan Smith, Lamar Jackson, and Kyle Hamilton. Don't go away. It's Ravens Preview, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
This is Ravens Preview, ESPN 630. This is the 14th meeting between the two teams. The Ravens lead the series 9-4, but they've lost 3 of the last 5. The most recent meeting 3 years ago when the Raiders won in overtime 33-27. John Harbaugh talking to the media this week about the 16 carries that his quarterback Lamar Jackson had and the fine line, and listen how snarky he gets, the fine line between being aggressive and playing it safe.
We don't live in that world of fine lines. I mean, we live in the world of competing, going out there and doing the best you can. There's no lines being drawn. The only lines that we have are the lines on the field, the sidelines, the goal line, the back end line. Okay, that was a big one. That was a big line that was really important in this game. Those other fine lines you're talking about, I'm not even aware of those. I don't know what those are.
Yeah, I mean, he's not in a position where he can say to a 2-time MVP, let me tell you when to run and when not to run. So he's got to leave it up to him. On the other side of the ball, he's facing Max Crosby. Max Crosby, one of the most ferocious players in the NFL, someone who was a game wrecker last time they played 3 years ago and is doing more of the same this year.
Yeah, he's a game wrecker, no doubt about it. One of the best players in football. Very unpredictable player because of his high level of energy. I mean, he brings it every single play, plays almost every snap. He's upfield, he's underneath, he's in the he's back around the backside, he's spinning. You know, he's knocking your hands off. He's running to the ball. He's just a game wrecker. To use that word, I think is exactly the right word. So we're gonna have to do everything we can, but you can't put 11 guys on one guy. You've got to handle all 11 of their guys as well. So we're going to have to do a great job with their whole defense, and definitely he's the guy you put the dot on and understand he's the top guy that you need to look out for.
The Ravens defense, led by Roquan Smith, who came over in a trade from Chicago and has immediately stepped into a great role for the Ravens. He's not Ray Lewis, but he's in that Ray Lewis mode as both a leader on the field and off the field. And while there has been communication issues here in Washington with the Commanders, they got some in Baltimore, but Smith is looking to shore that up.
Yeah, communication is a huge thing. Like I always preach, communication breeds understanding. So each and every play, we communicate with each other and we're all on the same page. We're a hard defense to beat. But when we lack in those areas, then that gives teams opportunities to take advantage of that. So we just have to look ourselves in the mirror, each and every individual, and know that we're going to keep our communication up to a T. So that's all it's going to take. And if we do that, our ability will take care of itself.
Kyle Hamilton talked about how everyone's being accountable on the defense. How important is that to have everybody taking accountability and looking at areas where they can improve individually?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the main thing. It's always about looking yourself in the mirror first and foremost before you can ever approach anyone else with something. And it's something that Coach DeLeon told us came from more so Jody. Like, when you look yourself in the mirror after each and every day, if everyone practiced or played like you, how would the game fare out? And I think if you ask yourself that type of question, then that should give you your answer.
Roquan, what do you think of Gardner Minshew? What challenges does he bring? You guys just saw him last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a veteran, been in the league for a while. He's very crafty. So excited about the matchup. Know he's very elusive in the pocket, can make guys miss. But we got to stick true to who we are as a defense and apply pressure. And when you apply pressure, can force some mistakes.
Gardner Minshew is like Fletch. Every year you look at the NFL, you go, oh, that's where he is. Oh, he's with that team now. Really? So he was with Indianapolis last year when they came into Baltimore and they won. So now he's back as the starting quarterback of the Raiders. And when you talk about starting quarterbacks around the league, you don't talk about Gardner Minshew, but sure enough, he's showing up with another team. So he will be the quarterback on the field. And I think the fact that they played him last year, even though he's with another team, is probably going to help them on Sunday. We talked about Lamar Jackson running the ball 16 times, and one of the big offseason storylines was how he dropped his weight. He's played as high as 230. He's supposedly down to about 205 right now and says he's loving it.
I felt great, Jameson. I'm not going to lie to you. I believe someone was like, I don't like his weight. He lost weight, and I don't know how he'll look out there. And, those guys are huge. And I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm a grown man, too, just like those guys. So I feel pretty good. Came out the game pretty good. We're going to keep it going.
Yeah, and who among us wouldn't want to be able to control their weight like that? Just decide that you want to weigh less, and you go ahead and do it. And so far, so good on Lamar Jackson as he stayed healthy with 16 carries last week. Last thought from Kyle Hamilton, the safety, and this has been, some scheduling that's a little bit different in that you start on a Thursday, then you're off for an entire weekend. So it's been 10 days. By the time they get to the field, it'll be 10 days since they played, and Hamilton addressed that this week.
I think it was Friday night or early Friday morning after the game. We got back, probably got in my bed at like 5 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I was like, didn't feel like I played well, and I'm like, I cannot wait to get back out there on Sunday, and literally dreamt about the Raiders game, like going out there and making plays and stuff like that. And it makes you that much more hungry, and I feel like a lot of guys are in that same thought process with it. And, I think that's what makes us great. We're all competitive and want to do well, and, we're just bred that way.
Yeah, and normally you want to get back on the field as quickly as you can. but they will have waited 10 days to do that. Again, a 1 o'clock kickoff coverage here at 12:30. After this game, they go back on the road. They play at Dallas. Then they have a Sunday night game against Buffalo, and then have to turn around and go to Cincinnati. Now, it's early, and we've seen Cincinnati lose their opening game, so we really don't know how good they are. Dallas beat a Cleveland team, which looked really terrible, so we don't really know. And the data we now have on the Buffalo Bills is they looked really good last night. They blew the doors off the Miami Dolphins. Then the matchup with Washington will be October 13th. But Ravens 0-1 as they look to get things back on track this week as they play the Raiders. We will be your home for Ravens football throughout the year. Every game starts with pregame coverage at 12:30. Want to thank Kevin Oestreicher from Locked On Ravens for coming on today. Isaac Kuhn-Harris for running the show. Thanks to all of you who listened. Have a great weekend. Bram Weinstein is coming up next, and I'll see you back here Monday morning at 9 a.m.